one note is off, it eventually destroys the whole symphony, David.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Schlocket Science, the most inauthentic voice in true crime. Well, incredible news. 2 handwriting experts have made a breakthrough in the Ramsey case. This is a breakthrough 27 years in the making. And as John Ramsey says, this is the silver bullet. This is what we've been waiting for. You know, they've done what no one else could do. They've identified the writer of the ransom note. And how they did that was they got Gary Oliver to write samples using a Sharpie pen. It's absolutely brilliant. And as we all know, whoever wrote the ransom note killed JonBenet, right? Now, what we're going to do is look at a sample of Gary Oliver's handwriting and place it side by side with the ransom note. And what you can see is it's absolutely okay. We're not gonna do that. I'm not gonna review the expert analysis that went into the handwriting analysis. I'm satisfied that they are as qualified, as qualified experts. They must know far more than I do. For that matter, the CBI's expert at the time, Chetubowski, who somehow got it into his head that the handwriting sort of resembled Patsy Ramsey's, along with the Ramsey housekeeper and family friend Judith Phillips. And so instead of dealing with the handwriting, and I feel like it's been that has been done, experts have solved the case. And so I think instead what we're going to do is review the superior intruder narrative. You know, I've often spoken about the other narrative. I think it's time that we give the superior intruder narrative its due. It's the narrative that's always made so much more sense. And look at firstly how our intruder, that's Gary Oliver, how he committed this crime. And then secondly, how he managed to evade law enforcement. Because first of all, he committed this crime. And secondly, law enforcement have just always been 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 steps behind him. How is he this brilliant at evading law enforcement? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, I'll be doing the number 4 clue we all missed in the Madeleine McCann case, so look out for that. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Now, although Gary Oliver has confessed to the crime, remember he said, "I hurt a little girl in Boulder." That was his confession. And that was on the evening of December 26, 1996. Well, that can only be one little girl. And he's never really provided a step-by-step narrative. And so I think it's time that we did. We're going to do that for him. And so what I want you to imagine is almost a AI version of Gary Oliver. We go back in time, and there he is, and he's standing right outside the Ramsey home, right? And think about what we know now and just project it back. So Gary decides he wants money. You know, he wants over $100,000, or he wants to JonBenet, or both. I'm not quite sure, but perhaps it's a little bit of both. And incidentally, based on what we know now, what do you think he wanted to do most? I mean, in the end, it seems like he just didn't really care about the money. He was actually more interested in the other thing. And so ultimately he decides to make his move on Christmas when the Ramseys are out. Fortunately, they leave the alarm off. And so he kind of wanders around the property. He's looking for a way in. And he stops at the grate. He looks down into it and he sees, well, that's a way I can go in. And so he enters through the grate and the open broken window. He sits tight for a few hours, maybe dawdles in the Ramsey kitchen. That's where he finds the Sharpie pen. That's where he finds a couple of writing pads. And since he's got a lot of time on his hands, he writes the ransom note. And That's why it's such a long ransom note. He might as well, kill time. And so he writes the 3-page ransom note in which he demands a certain amount, but also threatens to kill JonBenet, and hence, isn't that what happened? Eventually, everyone arrives and everyone goes to bed. And that is when he goes to JonBenet's room, takes her from her bed, feeds her pineapple, well, unless she has pineapple and then goes to bed, and then he takes her down to the basement. Now, I'm not sure whether he ties her hands, but he either forgets to molest her or is about to do something. Something happens and he hits her hard over the head with a bat or a golf club or the flashlight that he's brought with him. And if it was with a bat, well, it happened to be handy. If it was with a golf club, well, there were a couple of golf clubs in the basement. If it was with a flashlight, well, then he took it back upstairs and wiped it down. Perhaps he also made a garrote just in case he wasn't strong enough to subdue her, or perhaps Patsy did that to make it look like whatever was done was worse than it really was, so no one would suspect her. Panicking, even though no one has woken up, so he's committed his crime. Unfortunately, because of this head injury, JonBenet isn't going to make it. But no one has woken up, but he's panicking. And so Gary exits the way he came in. And then he thinks, dang, I forgot the note. Little does he know, he's actually committed a near perfect crime. He's left no fingerprints, no DNA, just a long note claiming to belong to a foreign faction of, I guess, pedophiles. And guess what? They're not even going to suspect him. They're going to suspect the Ramseys for a long time. The Ramseys are going to kind of be the focus of the investigation. He's committed essentially the perfect crime. And he's also quite a considerate killer, because in that ransom note he suggests his victims be well rested. We also know that Gary was the sort of guy who had the inside track with John Ramsey. Just as John Douglas said, he said, this guy knows you, and that's why he's angry specifically at you, and also he knows about the bonus. Makes sense, right? After going to all the trouble not to get caught, he doesn't leave any DNA, no fingerprints, no trail leading back to him, no witnesses. Well, the next day he calls someone and confesses to killing JonBenet. But he doesn't mention her name, and some other media don't hear about it either, nor the cops, nor the Ramseys themselves. And the Ramseys then go onto CNN about a week later, and they say they don't know who it is, but there's someone out there. Well, that someone out there says, hey, it's me, I did it. And then nothing happens. About 5 years go by, obviously the Ramsey case kind of explodes. It becomes a very big case. And then guess what? Lou Smith finds Gary Oliva. And then from October the 1st, 2002, Gary Oliva's name starts appearing in the media. And you can imagine he's a gold mine, because everyone's trying to find out who killed JonBenet. Now, according to an article published on CBS News, dated October 1st, 2002, the phone call started with him sobbing into the phone, said Michael Vale, the man whom Oliva called. Michael is Oliva's best friend from high school. And so Oliva was sobbing on the phone, and he related to me that he'd done something horrible. Oliva mentioned that he was in Boulder. The call, Michael says, came just days after the Ramsey murder. Now, you would think if he's just done something horrible, well, that he would call after that, like the first thing the next morning or even that night. And in any event, he does call days after the murder, and he says he'd hurt a child. He was sobbing like you've never heard a grown man sob or cry before in your life. Well, Gary has been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Anyway, he says, I knew it was serious. I knew this was very serious. And so Michael, who lived in a nearby state, called Boulder police. Unfortunately, Gary didn't say JonBenet's name, but who else could it be? Well, Michael knew that it could only be JonBenet. Unfortunately, Oliva not only forgot the ransom note and accidentally killed JonBenet, according to what has been said, he also forgot to leave behind his DNA at the scene. And of course, this became a DNA case for a while. And of course, the grand jury didn't choose to indict Oliva. But in any event, after being super careful not to leave behind fingerprints, footprints, or to allow anyone to see him, the next day he was eager to come forward. And yet, in Oliva's case, police didn't investigate him until nearly 4 years after JonBenet's death. In other words, in 2001. That's 22 years ago. They did investigate him 22 years ago. And what had happened was they caught Oliva with drugs and a stun gun. Now, strangely, Oliva actually turned himself in. It's not so much that they caught Oliva, he turned himself in. Not in 1996, but in 2001. Even stranger, after turning himself in, he said he'd never used that stun gun on a child. And he also said he did not hurt or kill JonBenet. Now, the strange thing is that you will hear over and over again that Oliva confessed to killing a child, but you never hear about the numerous times he denies killing JonBenet when he's asked. What this means, based on the expert handwriting analysis we've seen, is that this is the breakthrough. That when he's asked, he denies it, but then the handwriting analysis proves it, doesn't it? That's the silver bullet. What was needed all along was for Gary Oliva to go to the police and to say to the police in a recorded setting, I killed JonBenet. But he never did that. And so what was needed was the silver bullet, and this is it. His handwriting to be a perfect match. And so I think if he says he did it, he did it. If he says he didn't, he did it. In any event, going back to that CBS article, why aren't the Boulder police, this is a quote from that, taking these leads more seriously? Well, they say police have dismissed Oliva because his DNA doesn't match evidence at the scene. He was very careful. He must have worn gloves and perhaps went into the crime scene wearing a hazmat suit. The Ramsey say that police have a double standard. While some suspects have been cleared because their DNA doesn't match, they have not been cleared for the same reason. Just this week, police said Oliva is not a suspect. Sources say his DNA doesn't match evidence at the scene. But look where we are now. His handwriting does match. Boom! And I mean, that seems crazy. This is not a DNA case, or is it? Perhaps if DNA testing finds Oliva's DNA, well, then it'll become a DNA case. Or if they don't find it, well, then it won't be a DNA case. If it's not a DNA case, isn't it a handwriting analysis case? Isn't that the thing that's been missing from this all along? You've got this big clue, the handwriting. Test the handwriting, you'll find your killer, and that's exactly what's happened. Now, what I find interesting in the samples tested by the handwriting experts is they don't seem to provide a date or the original complete sample. Is this Gary Oliva's handwriting in 1996? Because handwriting can evolve. Or is this Gary Oliva's handwriting since he was in prison, I think since 2019 when he started writing these letters? So if his handwriting evolved for 22 years, that's fine, right? Which also suggests that maybe Oliva has had years to imitate the ransom note, or you can take 22 years of handwriting and then find a couple of matches. Let's not worry about that, though. Bear in mind, there's been a spot open, a spot vacant on the ransom note author for decades now. Also, bear in mind, it's not been clear who wrote the ransom note, so there was always that slot waiting to be filled. Instead of trying to conceal his handwriting, as some dodgy experts suggested occurred in the ransom note, it sort of has some very squiggly letters. There seems to be an effort to convince the public that Oliva's handwriting is the real deal. I wonder whether Oliver's high school pal told him that he was going to do that he was going to take his handwriting and prove that he was the ransom note writer. Incidentally, Michael Vale is to the Ramsey case, I think, what Helga Bushing is to the McCann case. He's someone that has spent years trying to prove someone that was once his friend is one of the most famous murderers in the world. And after 27 years, now we know. Don't we? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.